Advisor Show with Jay Coulter.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Blockchain Update with my partner in this project, Dan Weiskopf, portfolio manager at Toroso Investments and co-portfolio manager of the Block ETF, symbol BLOK. Dan, thanks for coming back on this month.
Always a pleasure, Jay. Thanks very much for having me.
Yes, and it was great to meet you in person finally at the Exchange ETF conference last week. We should have done a show then.
Hey, Jay, I didn't realize you're taller than I thought, by the way.
Something nobody has ever said. All right, let's get started. A couple of stocks in your most recent monthly update that I think viewers would really like to hear about. So we're going to talk about Intel and Roblox. When you look at the addition of, did you add Intel to the portfolio this month? Yep. And
yes,
why?
I did. We did. Yeah. So you look at Intel, and it's their first foray into the mining space, and we spoke to 2 out of the 4 miners that were buying the equipment, and the excitement there is that because it's manufactured in the U.S., the miners are actually saving 25% of the cost, right? So that gives Intel a huge advantage versus, we'll say, Bitmain, who is producing the equipment for 25% more, right? And so as long as they can maintain the quality, this could be a real home run for Intel.
Is there any reason to believe Intel would not be able to maintain the quality?
There's always risk, Jay. There's always risk. No, I would agree with you, but it's because it's chips and it's building new miners. There's always some challenges, and it might be the integration issue because they're just doing the chips, and then the miners are doing some OEM to build the actual miners, the computers.
All right. In the past, you've talked about how the larger miners have some great economics that really give them a competitive edge over some of the smaller players. When you look at the volatility that we're experiencing today, and Bitcoin has been very volatile. So let's just talk about time periods where it is trading below $40,000. How are those economics changing? Is there any way that some of these smaller players might be able to capture some from the larger players with this volatility?
Oh, I think it's the opposite, actually. I think the bigger players are going to capture more of the revenue because they have the capital availability to grow and buy more equipment. I don't think what people realize is that the payback on this equipment can be 7 to 10 months. I mean, imagine a business that you buy equipment and you get your money back in a year. I mean, that's a fabulous business. Now, they've got to execute well, candidly, which has been a challenge for some of them, but the miners are really, really cheap. So you have to look at what the potential earnings power will be in 2023, and frankly, make certain assumptions on whether or not Bitcoin is going to be 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, et cetera.
Yeah. And tough to model out in this type of volatility as a portfolio manager, I'm sure. And you have to take a longer lens view, which you clearly also need a longer lens view when you're looking at the metaverse. And Dan, I'm hoping that you and I can do a whole show on the metaverse at some point, kind of a metaverse 101. But in lieu of that, Roblox is a game that my kids played when they were little, and it seems to have shown up in the portfolio. What does Roblox have to do with the space that you guys are allocating to?
Yeah, we don't talk that much about the metaverse in general, but it is part of the blockchain, right? And in the case of Roblox, you're looking at something like 11 million developers, right, on the platform, maybe 125 million people part of the platform in 2025. It's very difficult not to be a part of the metaverse when you're investing in the blockchain. And just note, as a reminder, on both Intel and Roblox, we size positions carefully, right? So this is just a little entree into what we might build as a bigger position.
So sizing positions is great for risk management. And it looks, according to your most recent report, to have been very helpful during some of these drawdowns we've seen in some particular names. And Dan, because we've spoken about them before, I'd love to get your thoughts on a couple of these names that have had some fairly significant declines. Let's start with Voyager Digital. What's your thought on their current position?
Yeah, Voyager Digital is a position we've held for years, and I speak to Steve fairly regularly. And people ask us about regulation often, and I think Voyager has a seat at the table now as a result of the regulations being highlighted right now. But it doesn't mean that the stock has done well, unfortunately. So we still have the position. We have not increased the position. We've maintained it, but as a result, it has gone down as a percentage of our overall portfolio. But we're optimistic about this management team and their ability to deliver on a long-term basis.
Yeah. Viewers, if you're not familiar with the Blockchain Interviews, a series that Dan hosts over on ETF Think Tank, go to theblockchaininterviews.com. That's theblockchaininterviews.com. And you can see interviews with Steve, Michael Saylor, and other thought leaders from the blockchain space. Dan, I would like to ask you about a recent interaction you had with Michael Saylor. I know at the conference you had in Miami, you were able to host a dinner with him. Did you learn anything from that?
Having time with Michael Saylor is always very interesting. He's an important thought leader in the space, and we had the dinner. I also had some one-on-one time with him, and he's very optimistic about Bitcoin, as we know, but his emphasis is around the regulation, right? Meaning, as an example specifically, Yellen, who used to be basically a Bitcoin bear, is now far more open-minded to it being a real technology. And I think there's evidence of that based on her speech. So yeah, that's one of the things I learned. I kind of, heard it in her tone as well. But I think candidly, Saylor is often misunderstood in his extreme commentary on Twitter. But he is very rational in his thought process, and I was excited to have the time with him.
Well, speaking of rational, I consider myself to be a very rational person when it comes to portfolio construction. I left the session at the exchange conference where he spoke, and I wanted to sell everything I had and put it into Bitcoin. Knowing that I shouldn't do that, but he is very, very, very convincing. The term he uses is that he is a Bitcoin maximalist.
And he is.
So Dan, let's wrap up with this. We're recording this in April of 2022. As you look out over the rest of the year, we're experiencing some volatility right now. I'm not asking you to predict, but I'm asking, what are your thoughts on how folks that want to allocate to the space should be thinking about the different subsectors of the blockchain space?
Well, I mean, I spoke about the miners specifically, right? These are companies that are actually going to earn money in a short time frame, I think. And our weighting on the miners, frankly, is on the lower side of how it's been in the past, just by virtue of our own discipline. You mentioned risk management. I think that the metaverse has huge potential as well, and we're looking every day for different opportunity sets in that area. But the issue is the earnings aren't there just yet. We're very focused on earnings growth as well as opportunity.
Download this month's blockchain report by going to blocketf.com. That's blocketf.com. Dan, thanks for coming back on.
Thanks, Jay. Enjoyed it as always.